أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد
اللهم صل على محمد
وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد. During these days that we're together during Muharram, the topic that I'd like to focus on is, I'm giving the title Toward Knowing God. The idea is that I think that our reflection on Tawheed, on Allah Himself, His attributes, His qualities, our relationship with Him is something that we need to work on more. And so I'd like to spend these days that we have together focusing on this in my own reading and thinking, and then share these thoughts with you. And hopefully we can use these lectures and the whole experience of the Majlis and the intercession of Imam Hussein to get closer to Allah, which is the ultimate goal even of the Azadat. It's not something else, it's to get closer to Allah Himself. So today I'm going to introduce the topic to you and kind of give you a sense of why I think it's such an important topic that we need to focus on. So one of the difficulties that we have, one of the problems I think we have in our society, in our community, is that we tend not to put as much focus on Tawheed. When I say Tawheed, it's not just that God is one, but all the things that relate to Allah. Right? Knowledge about Him, what kind of a being He is, what His attributes are, how we're supposed to relate to them, what can we know, what can we not know. How are we supposed to get closer and grow in our knowledge of God and our relationship with God? So these are things that I think we tend to take very lightly. What I've noticed in many situations, in many families, many Sunday schools, many educational systems in Islam will focus on Tawheed just as one small kind of stepping stone to knowing about Islam. So we could count it as one of these 5 usul al-Deen. And the oneness of God and His attributes is one of the usul al-Deen. And so we'll teach that to our children, and it's a very simple kind of concept that, of course, God is one. That's the gist of it. And sometimes that's the end of it as well. There's so much more that we should know about Allah. And if that's the limit of our education about Allah, then first of all, it's very shallow. And if that's shallow, then everything else in our deen is also very shallow. And if that's shallow roots, they are very susceptible to all sorts of affliction as well. And so if that root is not deeper and deeper, it doesn't keep on growing and deal with all of the obstacles and all of the challenges that it comes across, then the very foundation of our deen is something that's very weak. And if that's weak, then the slightest wind can blow that deen down. And the winds are many in this time, in this age that we live in. So this is something I think we need to focus on a lot more. Think of the fact that Allah is actually everything. Allah is everything. We are living in a dunya that Allah has designed in such a way that He calls it Darul Khurur. And khurur in Arabic means deception. Right? So we live in a place where we look around you. Think of your home. Think of the room, the building in which we live, the solid ground beneath us, the tremendous astronomical bodies in the sky that are even mind-boggling to think of their size and their mass and their different qualities. So all these things in the dunya, they appear to us to be very solid. That these things last. Our own bodies, our own beings, right? We are under the illusion that these are some things that are very solid and that will endure. And we don't realize that actually all of these things are more like an illusion than reality. It's not that we live in a dream world and nothing exists. No, we all exist. All these things around us exist. They are there. But there's no permanence to them. Right? Our fundamental belief is that Allah is the one who, the Khaliq kulli shay. He's the one who created everything. When we think of Allah creating everything, sometimes again we have this misconception. We think of a builder creating a building. Right? It's a very kind of elementary type of way of thinking of things, but that's how we think of, some person came and designed this building, and some construction people came and they put these materials together, they built this building. Maybe 20, 30, 40 years ago, maybe they're dead. No. That person who designed it, the people who put the building together, they may have passed away, they may be far away from here if they're alive, but the building continues to exist. So once the building is created, our experience is that the building continues to exist for sometimes extremely long periods of time. I think of ancient relics, ancient ruins that are there for now thousands of years. Those people who carved those stone monuments and built those pyramids and did all these things so many millennia ago, they're of course long gone. Their civilizations have even had their whole life cycle and have died. We can only piece together parts of their civilization, but these monuments that they built are still standing. So all of this gives us a sense that the dunya is somehow very solid, very permanent. It's always been there, and you can't even imagine a time when it will no longer be there. That's Darul Ghurur. Right? An abode in which we are deceived into thinking that this is going to last. This is it. This is the beginning and the end of our existence. What we need to stretch our mind to understand, and what Allah's guidance to us helps us to try to understand, is that no, all of this stuff is more like a shadow, more like an illusion. It's more like a reflection of Allah than anything permanent. What is permanent, has always been and will always be, is only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And His existence is everlasting. Al-Ilahu Qadim, that we read in the dua yesterday. And He's the ancient Lord who will always be, always has been. And if we want to talk about something that exists, it's really only Allah who exists. Everything else, it's not. When we say He created the dunya, or He created you and me, He's not like that builder who took some bricks and put some bricks together and built a building, and then the builder went on and built another building and then had a whole life and then died, and the building stays standing. That's not the relationship between Allah and us. Besides the fact that Allah always lives and never dies, that's of course a huge difference between Him and a builder. But even the existence of God's creation and Allah, the Creator Himself, is very different from the relationship of this building and the builder who built it. The builder who built it did not create the material. He did not create the matter. At most, he invented a form. He took existing material and changed the form and put it into a particular form, so we have these particular dimensions and all these different things. He didn't create, in that sense, creating the matter from nothing. No, He didn't do that. He took pre-existing matter, changed the form, put it into bricks, put it into different materials, and then assembled it together in a way that now serves this particular purpose and creates an enclosed space. That's not creation in the way that Allah creates. Allah creates things from scratch, from nothing. There's absolutely nothing in existence, and He creates that existence. And again, it's not that once He creates something that it exists, and now He can kind of, in theology they talk about a clockmaker. He's not a clockmaker who starts everything, he winds up the clock and then lets it go, and then the clockmaker can go about his business or die, and the clock keeps on going. It's not like that. When Allah creates the universe, His creation is not something that has any permanence. It appears to have permanence to us. It lasts for a very long time that we can't even fathom. But everything in the dunya is constantly, completely, in every moment, dependent on Allah to keep it in existence. So just do this mind experiment with me. When you think about, we read so many descriptions in the Quran about the end of time, when Allah will destroy everything. Right? Absolutely nothing will remain, and then He'll recreate the Akhirah. Right? So there's going to come a point where there's nothing, and then there's an Akhirah, where He creates new sky and earth. يوم تبدل الأرض يوم تبدل السماوات والأرض يوم تبدل الأرض غير الأرض والسماوات. Another earth will come in place of this earth, another sky will come in place of the sky that we now know. It's not the same cosmos that will then transfer into the Akhirah. It will be a new creation altogether. So when you think about everything being destroyed, what do you picture? When you think about Allah destroying all of humanity, when you think of Allah destroying the entire cosmos before the Day of Judgment, at that second, at the first trumpet blow, what do you picture? I think sometimes what we picture is the kind of destruction that you might imagine from a nuclear bomb, from some sort of huge explosion, from a supernova, right? Where things, for instance, explode. And so the form of something, all the matter stays in place, but it explodes. So a mountain, for instance, is there. It has hundreds of thousands of tons of material there. When Allah destroys it, what happens to it? We think that mountain is just going to explode, for instance. All that matter, all that rock and rubble and debris will just be dispersed. But it'll still be there. Right? In science, one of the scientific principles is the conservation of matter and energy. Right? So you have this sense within the dunya that matter cannot be created or destroyed. Energy cannot be created and destroyed. You can just change the form from matter and energy. But everything that exists, always has existed, always will exist. That's the limit of science, because science only knows what's in the physical world. And within the physical world, that's true. Whatever Allah has created, that is what exists. He has the power to create more, but He doesn't. Aballahu an yujriya al-umur illa bi asbab. One of the policies that He's written for Himself is that He wants everything to work on processes. So He doesn't do things miraculously on a regular basis. The miracles are exceptions. The regular functioning of the cosmos is with cause and effect. There are certain processes that Allah has put into place, and those processes take place, and certain things happen because of that. And then we can understand it with a scientific eye. We can uncover what those processes are and try to explain how the dunya works. But in reality, when Allah destroys everything, it's not that everything just explodes and the matter is still there, but for instance, it's all in powder and dust and all scattered everywhere. When Allah decides that something's not going to exist, it actually ceases to exist. It's more like, if you picture yourself, if Allah wanted you to stop existing, what would happen? It's not that you'd fall over dead and your corpse would be there. If He wants you to cease, that's death. Death is not non-existence. Death is just another stage of our existence. If He wanted me to not exist anymore, I would actually cease to exist. My corpse would no longer be there. My soul would no longer be there. Nothing of my existence would be there. It would vanish from existence. It's more like if you think of a flashlight, or these laser pointers. Right? You flash a laser pointer on the wall, and you see that little beam that goes over there. That laser pointer is that light that's there on the wall, that doesn't exist separate from the actual device that's causing it. Right? If I shine that light on the wall, and then, for instance, the battery dies, or I put it in my pocket, or I turn it off, what happens to the beam? It also goes. It's not that once I start it, I push the button, and now that red dot is there on the wall, and then it's going to stay there forever, even if I take the pointer and put it away, or destroy it, or whatever. No, that's not the case. That dot, for it to exist, it has to constantly be given a push of photons from that pointer. That beam has to continually shine there for that dot to continue to exist. And as soon as I release the button, the dot's gone, as though it never existed. That's our existence. Allah doesn't make me and then set me free, and now I'm just living on my own independently. I'm never independent of Allah. When He creates me, He doesn't just create me at the beginning and then that's it, that's my only connection to Him. My connection to my Creator is a constant, persistent connection. He has to will me to exist in every moment. And if for a second He decides that He doesn't want me to exist, then I'm like that red dot that disappears. I no longer exist. That's the intimate connection we have to Allah. Not only us as humans, every part of creation. Those huge planets and stars that seem so massive, have so much energy and have their own gravitational field, that seem like, they're like, where can they go? How can Allah be so powerful that He can make that thing disappear, actually not exist anymore? He can. That's what we believe. He's ala kulli shay'in qadir. He's the one who created it from scratch, without precedent. He's the one who continues to will it to exist. And when He decides that it no longer needs to exist, it's to serve His purpose, He will simply retract His will. And if He doesn't will it to exist, it ceases to exist. So all the things that we think are so permanent in existence are actually illusions, are actually that dot of the razor, of the laser. The only thing that really is Allah. He is everything. He is the source of everything. Our very existence comes from Him. And again, not our existence in the beginning, but our existence in every moment of time. As long as He wishes us to exist in the dunya, He is the cause of that existence. When He wants me to die, then He wills that, and I transfer from this dunya into another world of barzakh. My soul continues to exist by His will, by His constant creative will. When the barzakh ends, He kills me in that barzakh and makes me alive again in the akhirah. By His will, my soul continues to exist and He creates a new body for me that goes with that soul, and then that is an eternal body and an eternal soul that goes into the judgment and into the hereafter until eternity. But all by Allah's will. If it's not for His will, then none of that happens. I cease to exist. At any moment, that can happen. Now, if it doesn't happen, it won't happen only because Allah doesn't do random things. So you don't have to be scared that you're going to cease to exist all of a sudden. A person's sitting here and he's going to disappear all of a sudden. That's not what I'm saying. We're not talking about sci-fi and kind of like those kinds of anomalies. He doesn't do things randomly. He doesn't do things outside of the norm. There are processes in place. His will is constant. His will is wise. So He wills for us as human beings, for instance, all of His creation to live and to exist during this time period that He set for us. But it's important for us to realize that we're not entitled to that. Allah doesn't owe me my existence. I don't have a right to live. Before Allah, we have no rights. Yeah, there are no inalienable rights before Allah. Whatever we have is from Him. Our very existence is from Him. If I live, it's a gift from Him. It's a gift. It's out of His grace that He allows me to live. I can't say I deserve to live. This phrase, sometimes people say they have a child who dies early and at a young age, they say, oh, he died too early, he died too young. That's belying an expectation that we have that Allah owes us that we live to old age. And if I die when I'm 10 years old or 20 years old, He's cheated me somehow. He hasn't given me my full life. I've died too young. No one dies too young. Everyone dies exactly at the moment that Allah decides that they're going to die. There is no too young. لَا يَسْتَأْخِرُونَ سَاعَةً وَلَا يَسْتَقْدِمُونَ. That phrase comes several times in the Quran. When Allah decides that something's going to happen, when your death is going to come, then you can't shift it this way and that. There's no moving it forward or moving it back. It's at the precise moment that He's decided that He's no longer going to give you a gift. Right? If I sit here and I dish out money, I give each of you $10 tonight, and then tomorrow night I give you $10, the third night I give you $10, the fourth night I don't give you $10, and you say, where's my money? It's not your money. It's a gift that I'm giving to you. You're not entitled to that gift. But the way our mind works, we become accustomed to things. We start taking things for granted. And after the 3 days, you start saying, well, okay, I have my space ready in my wallet. I'm ready to accept it. Where's my stipend? Where's this thing I'm expecting? And when you don't get it, you feel like you've been gypped. Like you've been deprived of something that you have a right to, you're entitled to. That's not the case. It's a gift. So our very life, our very existence is a gift that Allah has given us. And it's in His power fully, if He gave it to us in the first place, and once He has, He can take it back whenever He wants. It's His call completely, and I have no say about it. I have no say about it. He's given me some say out of His grace again. He's giving me a say, so I can say, Allah, give me a long life. I can give sadaqah and extend my life. I can do salatul rahim and extend my life. He's giving me agency in certain ways, but again, as a gift from Himself. Not because He owes it to me, or I can have some expectation that He can extend my life because I demanded, or I've done my job, so now He owes me this. He never owes me anything. That's our very life. Think of sustenance, think of all the other parts of our existence. These are all gifts from Allah. He gives them to us as long as He wants to, and if He decides not to, then that's the end of it, and there's no changing that. So this idea that Allah is everything is something so important. That everything else that we think is so solid and so permanent is actually an illusion. It's actually just that light shining from this flashlight. Allah is Nuru Samawati wal Ard. He's the flashlight. Flashlight sounds like such a kind of a simple way of talking about Allah, but He Himself says, He's the lantern. Right? مَثَلُ نُورِهِ كَمِشْكَاةٍ فِيهَا مِصْبَاحٌ, and so forth. And so He mentions that He Himself is like this light that's in this niche, and it's a brilliant light that seems to illuminate everything. That's Allah. And when Allah is everything, then we have to really engage with Him in a deep way. I think how intricately we come to know and become educated about the rest of the dunya. At least specialists and specialties aside, even our general education that we have for our children in their public school, right? We have a very comprehensive, wide-ranging education where they explore all different areas of the dunya and understand how it works, especially in the sciences for the physical, material parts, but then even in the other disciplines to understand other aspects of the dunya. And they spend 13 years in school before even going to higher education, learning about those aspects of the dunya in quite intricate ways. That's all good. That's all important because they need those things to live in this dunya. But my point is, when Allah is really the true existence and He's actually everything, and all this other stuff is just a factor of Allah and something He's created, and that's temporary and it just serves this purpose for Allah, how much more time and effort should we spend to know Allah Himself as the source of all of that? And if we're not treating Allah with that kind of respect, then we're really doing a great injustice in our relationship with Him. Recite salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Another point to keep in mind, so what I'm trying to get at is we're going to be speaking about Allah and trying to get to know Allah better during the course of these coming days. Today I want to hopefully drive home the point that this is really a worthwhile topic. This is something we should really spend time on. Right, so this is one point. The second point is that we have a verse in the Quran where Allah says the purpose of existence, the reason why He's created us, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسِ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. The essential purpose, if you ask why do I exist, why did God make me? The essential reason that He Himself explicitly says in the Quran is the only reason I made you is that you serve me. Right? That you be an abd to me, a slave to me. Alright, so if this is the purpose of our existence, everything that we do is supposed to be in servitude to Allah, right? That itself is a whole discussion and a whole evaluative process we have to go through to reflect on our lives and see to what extent are we serving Allah. Again, serving Allah, don't take it in some very narrow sense. I have to go off into a cave and just worship Allah night and day, and that's serving Allah. But if I have a job, or I'm going to school, or I'm doing other things in the dunya, that's not serving Allah. It's not that simple. Right? Serving Allah is an attitude. It's a way of thinking about the activities that you're engaged in. It's prioritizing what activities are pleasing to Allah, what activities are fulfilling the purpose for which God has put me here, which are within the bounds of the law that He has laid down. Any of those, all of those are attributes of a life that's in the service of God. Right, so if I'm going to my work and to earn a living, that's not dunya as opposed to akhirah. That's not serving, for instance, worldly needs as opposed to serving Allah. It can be, but it's not necessarily. It depends. It's an attitude. It depends. What's my thinking? How am I engaged in this work? In this work to earn a living. Is my relationship? First of all, how have I chosen this work? And last time I came here, I talked about decision making, and one of the decisions that we talked about was choosing career and choosing work. So have I gone through a good process, a reflective, deliberative process to carefully choose what kind of work I should engage in? Or did I choose what was most lucrative, for instance, even though it goes against Islamic teachings? Or no, did I thoughtfully think, well, here's a career, for instance, that I have some talent in, I can train for, and it's a good career, and it's also the activities I'll engage in that work are all halal activities. I won't be forced to go into this career and then do haram things every day and have to justify and have to somehow turn a blind eye to Islamic law so that I can do my career. So if I have chosen that career carefully with an Islamic lens, then that's one aspect, one ingredient to having a life that's in the service of Allah. It's still working in dunya, earning money, earning a living, which all seem like dunya activities, but no, those are part of the activities that Allah needs us to, He wants us to engage in, but He wants us to engage in them in a way that's within His law and His guidance. So by making that choice now, I have one aspect of living a life of service to Allah. And now the life that I live when I work and then I have other responsibilities, if I work in such a way that I'm a workaholic and I'm always working, and I sacrifice my family, they never see me, if I work in such a way that I can't ever engage in the Islamic community, I never have time to read a book or to read the Quran, I have to miss my prayers sometimes because I'm too busy at work. If that's the kind of work, even if it's halal work to begin with, but now the way I work is something like this, it's all consuming, then this is dunya. This is not serving Allah, this is now serving something else. Ego, dunya, greed, whatever it might be, but it's not serving Allah. Alright, so these are just two examples, two aspects of living in the dunya in a way that's in service of Allah. But my point is that if Allah has created us لِيَعْبُدُونَ يَعْبُدُوهُ, He's created us so that we worship Him, how are we to do that unless we know Him? If you think of relationships that we have with each other, sometimes we have very superficial relationships with people. So maybe I meet someone for the first time today, I ask them their name, they know my name, and that's really the end of it. So it's a good first step, but it's a very superficial relationship. Right, then maybe I go a little bit further and we ask a few questions of each other, so now we have some bio data about one another, and so now we have a little bit more information to go on, so our relationship is that much deeper, but still quite shallow. But then you engage with someone in a discussion, for instance. Better yet, you do something together practically, where you have to engage and you have ideas and maybe you have conflict, and now you have to work through that conflict and somehow work together despite the conflict and resolve all those things. Now your relationship becomes deeper and deeper. And we're told in a hadith, one of the best ways to know people is to travel with them. Right? So when you travel with someone, now you're living with them 24 hours a day, you're engaged with them at all all aspects. Here, for instance, if you just know someone from in the center, maybe you just see them for an hour, and that's it. You only see one little sliver of their life. You're not even talking much. You're not really engaged that much. So you only see a very limited aspect of them. But now imagine you go for a ziyarah, you go for Hajj with these same brothers and sisters, and you're living together, you're rooming together, you're engaged in all sorts of difficulties of travel that are inevitable together. Then you really start to see what each other is made of. There's so many different aspects of conflict and resolution and emotion, and you're tired sometimes. When you're tired and your guard is down, that's when you show your true mettle, and you start to see, and the same for the other person. So now you start to see each other in reality. And then you see that, oh wow, this person, even when he's the tiredest, he's still so patient, for instance. He's still so kind. Now you know that, okay, his kindness runs really deep. It's not just that he's very polite in the masjid, but as soon as he's tried a little bit, then he becomes very impatient and short-tempered. No, you've seen that even in difficulty, he lost his luggage, for instance. He faced all sorts of hardship, but he was still very patient, and he was able to, still keep composure and still remember to say his prayers, and all these different things. So now you start to see that this person has a lot deeper virtue than you initially thought. And it could go the other way as well. You see that this person is very short-tempered, has very poor character in those deep relationships, but in the shallow relationship, you don't really recognize that. So my point is, in our relationship with Allah, if we're going to worship Allah and serve Him, we need to know Him. But our knowledge of Allah should also be something very deep. If our knowledge of Allah, if our ma'rifah of Allah is shallow, it comes from those elementary school, Sunday school lessons, where Allah is one, and here let me memorize some of His attributes. And really that's it. That's the last time you've really thought about Allah or engaged with Allah. And that knowledge, for that child of 2 and 3 years old, that's excellent. That's a good first step, right? To know Allah, they should know some of these vocabulary words and some of these basic ideas. That's about all maybe they can understand at that age. But for a 25, 30, 50, 60, 70-year-old person, that's nothing. Yeah, it's like saying the alphabet, for instance, like learning your numbers. That's great for a 2-year-old or 3-year-old. But imagine if that's the extent of your knowledge of language and mathematics when you're 50 years old. Then that's not acceptable. You're not a functioning person in society if that's the extent of your knowledge of language and you can just say the alphabet. That is something like what our knowledge sometimes of Allah is in old age, because we haven't worked on it, we haven't engaged in it. We haven't really paid enough attention to it. Right? Education needs to be something that you're actively engaged in. These majalis are a wonderful institution, and they're a wonderful institution. There's no doubting that, but it shouldn't be the end or the only way that you engage with Islamic ideas. Right? Listening in education theory, listening to a lecture is the worst way to learn. It's passive. You're just listening. And the retention from just listening is very, very little. Even if I'm speaking very clearly and you're engaged, but how much do you remember once you step out of here, it's always a very small percentage of the whole. And that's in the best case scenario. And then if you get, lose your focus, if you doze off, things happen in a speech, and your child needs some attention, then you're losing so much. Versus when you engage in a book, when you're reading and you're engaging in that way, or you engage with a peer, a person who has knowledge, right? And now you're discussing something, you're asking questions, and you're arguing in a healthy way over some idea, then your retention, your comprehension, your learning is very deep, and it lasts. So the more you can engage in things, the better. The less you engage, the less faculties you engage, the worse. Right? Education here for teachers, they train teachers to try to engage as many faculties of your student as possible. You have all these senses. If they're only listening, then that's very limited. Let it be that they listen, they also see, they also smell something, they can touch something, they can, engage in different ways, ask questions, do hands-on activities. Like, the more they can engage with an idea, the deeper their knowledge will be, the more they'll retain, the more they'll come away with. So all of that has to be there in our knowledge of Allah. If our ibadah and our ubudiyyah, our worship and our service to Allah is going to be meaningful, it's going to be a factor of that relationship we have with Him, which is a factor of the knowledge that we have of Him. And if that knowledge is very superficial, then there's not much depth to my relationship with Allah. So one of the things we need to talk about in the course of these lectures is what are ways that we can strengthen that relationship? What are the different ways that we can know God better so that we can serve Him better? And if that's the very purpose of our existence, that's a worthwhile discussion. Recite a salah. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. One last reason I'll talk about before I need to close is that so we need to focus on our knowledge of Allah, our ma'rifah of Allah, because it is in constant danger of being lost. It's under constant attack, especially in the environment that we live in. The most obvious attack that we have towards our knowledge of Allah, towards our deen, is the attack of atheism, or the ideas of atheism, that there is no God, God's irrelevant, and these kinds of things. And that's something that, especially younger people, especially in university ages, that tends to be where you're exposed to these ideas the most. And that's also the time when you're in the most flux. For the first time, you're sometimes away from family. You're no longer under the protection of your parents. Either you're living in a dorm and you're completely away from your parents, or even if you're living at home, but so much of your engagement is outside of the home, sometimes for the first time in your life. And parents sometimes are very scared, and rightfully so. This is an important process of fledging, kind of leaving the nest, but it should be done very thoughtfully. And oftentimes, those first days in university are either a crisis that leads to a loss of faith, or it can also lead to a strengthening of faith. And personally, I have a story of gaining faith through that turmoil of university. That was where I finally took ownership of my faith and started to consciously become Muslim. But it doesn't always happen like that. The intellectual community of universities is a breeding ground for many different ideas, and exposure to those ideas is very refreshing and very important to the educational process. But the danger, the downside, is that atheistic ideas are also very prominent in university environments. And so older people sometimes don't realize the danger because they may not be exposed to these ideas. Right? Once you get into a certain stage in your life, then your experiences with people, your engagements with people can tend to be more limited, depending on what your lifestyle is like. Right? With these algorithms, even your social media and your web browsing end up also being very narrow. Sometimes they're catered to your own likes, so you don't really see oppositions. Right? You don't see things that are different from what you like to see. So you're not challenged. So when you're older, sometimes you don't realize how challenging these ideas are, but for young people especially, it's a very real challenge of atheism. But I think even more dangerous than atheism is an apathy to deen. The idea that it doesn't really matter. What difference does it make whether a person believes in God or doesn't believe in God? Believes in Islam or doesn't believe in Islam? You'll hear people saying, for instance, what's really important is that you're a good person. Right? You've probably heard that. What's really important is that you're a good person. You're nice, you're kind, you do good things to people, you're not hurting people. If you're doing that, then what does it matter if you're a Muslim or non-Muslim? Shi'i, Sunni, believer or non-believer in God? If you're kind, then you're kind. That's what's important. So this is also a very dominant idea in society. And I think sometimes this is even more dangerous than atheism. At least atheism is an attack. And there's an argument with it that can be, you can deal with it in a very conscious way. But apathy, or this feeling that deen is irrelevant to life, is something that's very difficult to challenge. And it seeps into every part of our existence. every relationship, all the media that we consume, all the stories that we consume. Right? They're all filled with this idea that it's not really important what you believe. You can believe very different things as long as you're a good person. As though being a good person is somehow separate, a separate thing from your connection with Allah. When Islam teaches us that no, actually, being good is defined by your relationship with Allah. There is no goodness without Allah. You can have a shell of goodness, right? I can give some money in charity. That's a good act. But is it truly a good act? Well, that depends on so many underlying factors. What is my intention in giving that charity? Right, I'll give you an extreme example. If I give charity to help the person in need out of compassion for the person, then yes, that's a virtuous act now. At least we haven't added the component of Allah yet. At least the intention behind it in a humanistic way is a good intention. Now what if I'm giving that same charity to degrade that person? To show them that you're nothing, and here, take this. You need me and I don't need you. Or if I do it, I give that charity to show you all how wealthy I am or how generous I am. So my intention is to please you all and garner your favor. The fact this person benefits from the money is irrelevant to my equation. The act is still the same. I'm giving charity. You might say that's a good act, but there's clearly a stark difference between the intentions behind the act, which actually is the core, the heart of the act. That's what really matters. And then Allah tells us that actually, no, even that's not good enough. Just doing it because I feel compassion for the person and I want to help the person, it's good, it's a human virtue, it's a dunyawi virtue, but it doesn't have any depth, it's not going to last. Until you connect this act with Allah Himself and say, I'm doing this because I want to please Allah, it's only then that this becomes an eternal act. مَا عِنْدَكُمْ يَنْفَدْ وَمَا عِنْدَ اللَّهِ بَاقٍ. And anything that's limited to us, like I said in the beginning, Allah is the only one who's permanent. Everything else that's in creation is temporary. So even our actions themselves are temporary. If I give charity, if I do an act, it's limited. It has a starting point and an ending point. Even if there are ramifications of that act, the ripple effect of that act are also limited. Eventually they die out. Right? So I give this money to this person as charity. Right? That act is limited. Then he goes, he spends that money, provides food for his family. That's the end. Unless they eat it, then the effect of that money is gone. How can I make that act eternal? By connecting it to Allah. وَمَا عِنْدَ اللَّهِ بَاقٍ. Once Allah comes into the picture and I say I'm doing this because I want to try to please Allah. I want to get closer to Allah, so I'm giving charity. Yes, I have compassion for the person too. But my real reason is to serve Allah. Once that becomes the reason, now this act is not only a virtuous act, it's actually a good act in the real sense, in the fullest sense of the word. It's not just a shell anymore. It's an act that is now connected to the eternal, which is Allah, and now that act becomes a source of eternal reward for me. It won't just be limited to dunyawi effects. Now it extends into the akhirah, and in eternity, I'll see the benefits of that act because it's an act that's now connected to the eternal. That's where goodness comes from our connection to Allah. Right? So if we want to serve Allah, we need to know Him. And that relevance that we need to constantly remind ourselves of, that deen is relevant and Allah is a necessary component of our existence. And that's also something we have to reflect on by building a relationship with Allah, understanding the relationship between my actions and Allah, like I just explained. And that helps us to understand how integral our relationship with Allah is for our life. Our life is actually meaningless. It's just a shell of a life, even if it seems to have virtue or seems to have goodness and meaning, until we add Allah and Allah becomes the foundation of that life. That life is just at most a shell of life, not a real life. And it's certainly not a life of servitude to Allah, a life of meaning, a life that will lead to something greater and hereafter. So inshallah, in the coming days, we'll explore more of these different ideas about Allah. How can we know Him more? What can we know? What can't we know? That's also very important. What can't we know? And then how can we build this relationship and know him better in a deeper way so that all of our life becomes in service to him and inshallah becomes to him. Let us start the story of Imam Hussein at the death of Muawiyah. So we know that Imam Hassan al-Mujtaba and Muawiyah had a treaty between them that Imam Hassan was forced to engage in. And this treaty lasted, the terms of the treaty were many, and Muawiyah violated all of the terms of the treaty in one way or another. However, Imam Hassan and then after his death, Imam Hussein, they held fast to their end of the bargain, their end of the treaty. They didn't say, well, he's broken one term, so we're going to tear up the treaty and no longer abide by it. They held true to all the terms of the treaty from their side because Muawiyah was very savvy. Even though he broke the terms of the treaty, he was able to do it in a way that deceived people. People didn't realize how bad his actions were, how terribly he was acting. And so Imam Hassan and Hussein, they abided by this until finally Muawiyah's death. Upon his death, he finally violated one of the clauses that was going to be the end of this treaty, which was that he did not have the right to appoint a successor. And then once he died, the Khilafah would revert to either Imam Hassan or Imam Hassan's successor, Imam Hussein. So once Muawiyah dies in the middle of Rajab, all bets are off. Imam Hussein says, I'm no longer bound to this treaty, and I can do what I need to do without the fetters of this unjust treaty. News of Muawiyah's death is first delivered to Yazid, who's some way away in some activities, probably some revelry. 3 days' journey away, one of the servants of Muawiyah takes the message to Yazid that your father has died. He returns, they engage in all the funeral rites and bury Muawiyah. One of the final pieces of advice that Muawiyah gave to Yazid was that you need to quickly shore up power. Right? The treaty is no longer going to protect you because they're going to now no longer be bound by the treaty. The people who are going to be your biggest problems and your biggest adversaries are in Medina. There are 3 individuals that you need to go to first before anyone else even finds out about my death. Go to them and force them to pledge their allegiance to you. Once they do, then your power is secure, and if you don't, then they will never cease to be problems for you. The 3 individuals that he names are Abdullah ibn Zubayr, Abdullah ibn Umar, and Hussein ibn Ali alayhi salam. So Yazid sends word to the governor of Medina, who is his cousin, his first cousin, Walid ibn Utbah ibn Abi Sufyan. So Utbah and Muawiyah were brothers. Yazid and Walid are first cousins. He is the governor of Medina from Muawiyah's time. He sends word to him explaining that Muawiyah has died and this and that, and then he gives a secret message to Walid. He says that without delay, you must take the bay'ah from these 3 individuals before anyone else finds out, and give them only one of 2 choices. They either give the bay'ah or you kill them on the spot. So Walid sends word, he sends a messenger out to find the 3 individuals. He finds Abdullah ibn Zubayr and Hussein ibn Ali in the masjid. And he says, the messenger tells them that the Amir has called you. You must answer the call of the Amir. It was evening time, it was an unusual time, this was not business hours. And so they're suspicious that this is something odd has happened, that he's summoning us at this hour. So they speculate amongst themselves what must have caused this sudden invitation. Imam Hussein guesses. He says, I'm pretty sure it's Muawiyah. He must have died, and they're trying to make sure that we give the bay'ah as soon as possible because they don't want any trouble. So they both make their plans. Abdullah bin Zubayr makes his own plans. He eventually escapes. He flees immediately towards Mecca. Imam Hussein goes home and he sends word to his Ahlul Bayt. He gathers, some reports say 18 men, some say up to 30 men from the Ahlul Bayt, Abbas and Ali Akbar and Muhammad ibn Hanafiya and all these people who are there, his family members, his close companions. He gathers together and says, come with your army. I've been invited to speak to the governor, and I think he's up to no good. So I need you to come to escort me and be there to protect me if I need you. So they all march together with Hussein in the middle and his whole entourage around him. They march to the governor's palace, and Imam Hussein gives them instructions that you wait here at the door. If you hear my voice raised, then you rush in and save me, because the trouble is brewing. Imam Hussein enters into the governor's palace. Not only is Walid ibn Utbah there, the governor, but he's also called one of his cousins, Marwan ibn Hakam. Right? Marwan is an evil character. He and his descendants take over the Umayyad Khilafah after Zubayr and after some years. And the Umayyads that we know throughout history, these are actually from Marwan's descendants, not Abu Sufyan's descendants. They ended a few years after Karbala. So Marwan is there, along with Walid ibn Utbah, and he announces that Muawiyah has passed away. Imam Hussein says, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. And Walid gives him this option. He says that the successor to Muawiyah is Yazid, his son, and you are called on to give your bay'ah. Imam Hussein says that it's not appropriate. What you need is a public affair. You need me to come out in public and pledge my support for Yazid in public. Doing it in private, in the dark, at night, this doesn't serve your purpose well. So he says, leave the affair now. Let's meet tomorrow in the day when everyone's gathered in the masjid, and then we'll see what happens. And then you can ask me this again in public, and then that's much better for you. So he says it in this way to buy himself some time without clearly saying no. Walid ibn Utbah, who is a little soft, he likes this. He says this is good because he didn't want to have the blood of Hussein on his hands. So he says this is fine, we'll deal with this tomorrow. Marwan steps in and says no. Walid, if you let him go at this point, you'll never have this kind of control over him where you can give him this ultimatum. You'll never have this sort of control over him again. You'll never be able to enforce the judgment of Yazid, which is to kill him. Imam Hussein turns to Marwan and says, "Do you dare threaten me with death?" He says, the reality of it is the likes of me will never give allegiance to the likes of Yazid. He raises his voice, his Ahlul Bayt hear his raised voice, and they rush in, daggers pulled. They surround him, and they escort him back to his home. He begins to make arrangements that we can't stay here in Medina, we're going to have to leave for Mecca. During the night, he goes to Rasulullah's grave. He wants to pay his respects one last time before he leaves Medina. And he spends the entire night praying and supplicating and speaking to his grandfather. We're told that at one point he dozes off for a moment before dawn. And when he dozes off, he sees a vision of Rasulullah speaking to him. And Rasulullah tells him that, Hussein, my son, I see you lying in sand, covered in blood and dust. He says that you have a station that Allah has reserved for you that you cannot attain except by facing the shahada that is in store for you. He says that I and your father and your mother and your brother, we long to see you. So Hussein responds, he says, I have no need to return to the dunya, take me now. I also long to be with you. Why can't I die now and join you in paradise at this moment? Rasulullah says, no, that's not the way Allah wants it to happen. You must go back. You must go through these trials and tribulations. The station that Allah has preserved for you can only be attained by going through these tribulations and attaining Shahada at Karbala. He says that, inshaAllah, on the Day of Judgment, after your Shahada, your brother Hassan, your father Ali, your uncle Ja'far al-Tayyab, your great uncle Hamza, they'll all be waiting for you as shuhada, and you and they will enter paradise as one battalion under the banner of Shahada. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdillah wa ala al-arwah allati hallat bi finanak. عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقي وبقي الليل والنهار ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. Allah, we call down your mercy and blessing on Muhammad and the family of Muhammad. We ask you, Allah, to increase us in our knowledge of you, increase our ma'rifah of you, help us to commemorate Imam Hussein in a way that's worthy of him. Accept whatever efforts we are making to make this commemoration. Forgive us for our sins and make us stronger in our faith and in our taqwa and in our good deeds. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.